They thought silence meant surrender. They mistook composure for weakness, loyalty for naivety. By the time the $88 million regulatory review began, only one person in that glass tower knew the truth, and she had never needed to raise her voice. The first time she said it, the shredder was already humming. The CEO's daughter-in-law stood at the far end of the executive floor, framed by a wall of glass and skyline, her reflection sharp as a blade. "We're shredding her files tomorrow," she repeated, tapping manicured fingers against a lacquered desk as if the decision were nothing more than switching caterers. The machine beside her purred in anticipation, devouring outdated reports and forgotten drafts. Paper confetti spilled into a silver bin like quiet snowfall. I stood near the doorway, holding a folder no one had asked about. No one looked at me when they discussed eliminating legacy documentation. No one asked who compiled those records, who indexed the amendments, who personally walked the notarized charter through 3 separate compliance audits years ago. They spoke in the lazy shorthand of inherited power, certain the building itself would protect them. And I said nothing, because silence, in certain rooms, is leverage. The executive floor smelled faintly of polished wood and expensive coffee. Outside, the city glowed in early evening gold. Inside, the conversation sharpened. They called it housekeeping. They called it modernization. They called it streamlining ahead of the regulatory review. $88 million hung over the company like a suspended chandelier. Beautiful, heavy, capable of crushing anyone standing beneath it. And yet, they were worried about paper. "Old charters complicate things," she added lightly, turning toward the CFO. "We're updating governance anyway. No need for dusty originals confusing regulators." The CFO hesitated for a fraction of a second. That pause was almost invisible. Almost. "Of course," he said finally. I watched his reflection instead of his face. Reflections are honest. They don't rehearse. His jaw tightened. He knew the difference between a copy and an original. He also knew the phrase notarized charter carried more weight than anyone in that room wanted to admit. 2 floors below, compliance staff were preparing binders for the regulatory review. Their desks were buried under tabs, cross-references, highlighted memos. They believed this was routine, a review, a process, a formal handshake with oversight. They didn't know the daughter-in-law had just ordered a bonfire. The rumor reached me before sunset. My archive access would be temporarily reassigned. My badge would still open the doors, of course. They were not reckless enough to create a visible conflict. No, this would be subtle. My name would disappear from email threads. My storage cabinet would be inventoried for efficiency. My work, years of it, would be reduced to redundant copies. They thought I would protest. I didn't. Instead, I walked back to my office, closed the door softly, and placed the folder on my desk. The folder was unremarkable. Cream cardstock, slightly worn at the edges. Inside it lay a document most people assumed existed only in scanned form. The original notarized charter, embossed seal intact, signatures dark and deliberate, the raised stamp catching light like a quiet warning. I had retrieved it 3 weeks earlier, not out of suspicion, not even out of fear, simply because something in the daughter-in-law's tone at the last board meeting had felt impatient. As if history were an inconvenience, as if governance were a decorative accessory, the kind of impatience that leads people to underestimate paper. The city lights flickered on one by one as dusk settled. In the reflection of my window, I saw myself, calm, composed, almost detached. It would have been easy to feel anger. After all, my position had been slowly eroded since she arrived with her polished smile and family surname. Projects reassigned, meetings shortened. my contributions acknowledged only in footnotes. But anger is loud, and loud people reveal their hands too early. Instead, I opened my notebook and made a list. Dates of charter amendments, names of witnesses, regulatory references tied specifically to original notarized documentation. The clauses requiring physical presentation during high-value regulatory reviews exceeding certain thresholds. 88 million exceeded every threshold. Down the hallway, laughter erupted. Someone ordered champagne for an upcoming investor dinner. They were celebrating early. That too was telling, because the regulatory review was not a ceremony. It was an examination. And examinations have a way of surfacing what people try to bury. At 9:12 p.m., my phone buzzed. A message from compliance. Quick question, do we have the physical original of the charter on file, or only the certified scan? I watched the blinking cursor for a long moment. Then I typed, on file. It was not a lie. The shredder stopped around 10. The executive floor emptied. Cleaning staff moved through with quiet efficiency, their carts rolling softly over carpet that had absorbed decades of ambition. From my office, I could hear distant metal cabinets closing. Somewhere in the building, copies were being reduced to strips. In my drawer, the embossed seal remained intact. They believed tomorrow would erase me. They believed eliminating documentation meant eliminating risk. They believed legacy could be managed with a machine. They had forgotten one small detail. Regulators do not ask for what is convenient. They ask for what is binding. And when they do, there is no substitute for the original. If you think this is just about paperwork, you're missing the one question that will change everything. Morning arrived dressed in glass and chrome. By 8:30, the executive conference room looked less like a workplace and more like a stage set for a performance. Bottled water aligned with military precision. Leather chairs angled toward the polished walnut table. Screens glowing with projections labeled $88 million expansion initiative. The number shimmered on every slide as if repetition could make it invincible. The regulatory review team was due at 9. Down the corridor, I could hear the CEO's daughter-in-law giving instructions in a voice smooth as lacquer. Keep it high level, no need to overwhelm them with archival clutter. We're presenting a forward-looking governance model. Forward-looking, as if foundations were optional. I walked into the room carrying only a slim portfolio, not the cream folder. That remained in my office safe, untouched. No one stopped me. No one asked what I was bringing. My invisibility had become complete, which was precisely what I needed. The regulators arrived without spectacle. 2 attorneys, 1 senior analyst, and the lead reviewer, a woman with steel gray hair pulled into a precise knot and eyes that measured everything twice. Their badges caught the light. Their expressions did not. Introductions circled the table like polite currency. When my name was spoken, the daughter-in-law's smile tightened by 0.5 millimeter. She oversees archival compliance, she said lightly. Mostly historical housekeeping. Historical housekeeping. I met the lead reviewer's gaze. She did not smile. The presentation began. Slides advanced. Revenue forecasts bloomed across the screen in gradients of optimistic blue. The CFO spoke confidently about liquidity buffers and strategic partnerships. The daughter-in-law outlined governance modernization, carefully avoiding any mention of the notarized charter. For the first 40 minutes, everything flowed. Then, the lead reviewer leaned back slightly. "Before we proceed further," she said calmly, "we require verification of foundational governance documents tied to the original incorporation and subsequent amendments." The air shifted. The daughter-in-law nodded as if this were expected. "Of course. We've provided certified digital copies in your pre-review packet. The reviewer folded her hands. I'm aware. However, under Section 14B of High-Value Capital Expansion Protocols, for transactions exceeding the $50 million threshold, we require physical verification. A pause, delicate but unmistakable. Who holds the original notarized charter? The question did not echo. It didn't need to. It landed with surgical precision. The CFO glanced toward Legal. Legal glanced toward the daughter-in-law. She kept her posture immaculate. We've transitioned to digital record-keeping, she replied. The certified scan is legally sufficient. The reviewer's eyebrow lifted, barely. That was not my question. Silence thickened. In that suspended moment, you could almost hear the shredders from the night before, their teeth chewing through paper confidence. The daughter-in-law's fingers interlaced. Our understanding is that the archival team manages legacy documents. Every head turned toward me. It would have been dramatic to hesitate. It would have been satisfying to let the silence stretch until it snapped. Instead, I spoke evenly. The original notarized charter is secured on site. The reviewer's eyes did not leave my face. Is it intact? Yes. Another silence, but this one felt different, electric, controlled. Please retrieve it, the daughter-in-law inhaled sharply, soft enough that only those closest could hear. Is that truly necessary? We are on a tight schedule. The reviewer did not blink. For $88 million. Yes? A tremor of realization passed through the room. Not panic. Not yet. But something colder. I stood, smoothing my jacket, and walked out without hurry. The corridor seemed longer than usual. Sunlight streamed through the windows, scattering reflections across marble floors. Staff members looked up as I passed, sensing the shift without knowing its cause. The building, so confident last night, now felt like a chessboard mid-game. Inside my office, I opened the safe. The cream folder waited exactly where I had placed it. The embossed seal glinted faintly. I traced the raised edge with my thumb, remembering the day it was notarized. 3 witnesses, deliberate signatures, the weight of intention pressed into paper. They had assumed it was gone. They had assumed I would not anticipate their housekeeping. They had assumed loyalty meant obedience. I closed the folder carefully and returned to the conference room. Conversations had grown hushed. The daughter-in-law's composure held, but her jawline had sharpened. When I placed the folder on the table, even the leather seemed to exhale. The reviewer opened it herself. She examined the seal, the signatures, the dates. She compared them to the digital copy on her tablet, scrolling slowly, methodically. Every second felt elongated. Then she paused on a clause, an amendment added 6 years ago. Interesting, she murmured. The daughter-in-law leaned forward. Is there a discrepancy? The reviewer looked up. There is a binding governance protection clause requiring dual signature authorization for structural document disposal. It appears any destruction of original charter materials without compliance committee approval would constitute a breach. The room went still. The CFO's color drained almost imperceptibly. Legal began flipping through printed bylaws with increasing urgency. The reviewer closed the folder gently. For clarity, she continued, voice calm but unyielding, has any attempt been made to dispose of foundational governance documents in advance of this review? The question was neutral. The implication was not. The daughter-in-law's smile reassembled itself piece by piece. Absolutely not. And yet, everyone in that room understood the danger of that answer, because shredders leave traces, inventory logs record access, security cameras remember what people prefer to forget. The reviewer nodded slowly. We will request audit access to document handling logs for the past 30 days. A single sentence, a quiet detonation. No one looked at me now. They were too busy recalculating risk. The $88 million expansion no longer shimmered. It hovered, conditional, dependent on compliance not just in numbers, but in integrity. I said nothing. I didn't need to. The foundation had spoken for itself, and what the audit logs would reveal tomorrow was something no one in that room had prepared a slide for. If you think the question ended there, you haven't seen what scrutiny does when it starts pulling threads. What would you have done in that moment? Spoken up sooner, or waited like she did? Tell me in the comments. The audit logs arrived faster than anyone expected. By mid-afternoon, the regulatory team had taken over a smaller conference room on the 22nd floor. Laptops open, external drives connected. A quiet hum of data extraction replacing the confident chatter that had filled the executive suite the day before. From my desk, I could see the city pressed beneath a low ceiling of clouds. The skyline looked subdued, as if even the buildings sensed something unfolding inside our glass tower. At 2:17 p.m., legal requested an emergency alignment meeting. The daughter-in-law entered first, posture flawless, phone pressed to her ear. She ended the call mid-sentence when she saw the regulators already seated. The CFO followed, carrying a folder he did not open. The CEO himself, usually insulated from operational turbulence, took a seat at the far end of the table. No one invited me. I came anyway. No one stopped me. The lead reviewer projected a simple timeline onto the screen. Access logs, badge entries, document storage activity, shredder maintenance reports, clean, chronological, impersonal. On Tuesday evening, she began calmly, Archive Cabinet 4B was accessed at 7:42 p.m. by executive credentials. The daughter-in-law's expression did not flicker. Security footage confirms removal of 3 storage boxes labeled Foundational Governance, Originals and Amendments. Legal stiffened. The reviewer continued. At 8:03 p.m., industrial shredding equipment on this floor registered extended operation exceeding normal volume by 312%. The number hovered on the screen like a fingerprint. A ripple of tension moved through the room. The CEO leaned forward. Are you implying? I am not implying, the reviewer interrupted evenly. I am establishing sequence. Silence returned, heavier this time. The daughter-in-law spoke carefully. We conducted routine archival reduction of duplicate materials in preparation for modernization. Did the Compliance Committee approve disposal of any foundational documents? The reviewer asked. A beat. No, she replied. The reviewer nodded once, almost sympathetically. That is the issue. Air seemed thin. The CFO's voice emerged tight. The original notarized charter remains intact, as verified. Yes, the reviewer agreed, which suggests one of 2 scenarios. Either disposal was incomplete or intent exceeded authorization. Intent. The word landed like a stone dropped into deep water. The CEO's gaze shifted slowly toward his daughter-in-law. For the first time since this began, her composure faltered, not dramatically, just a fraction too long before answering. There was no intent to breach governance. The reviewer clicked to the next slide. An email thread. Subject line, pre-review cleanup. Her words time-stamped. Let's eliminate outdated originals to prevent confusion during regulatory review. The room absorbed the sentence in silence. I believe, the reviewer said, tone measured, that the phrase eliminate outdated originals warrants clarification. No one looked at me. They didn't need to, because the difference between duplicate and original had just become $88 million wide. Legal began whispering urgently to the CEO. The CFO wiped a hand across his temple. The daughter-in-law straightened, gathering what remained of her authority. We acted in good faith to streamline documentation. Good faith, the reviewer replied softly, is demonstrated through process adherence, not assumption. Outside the glass walls, employees moved through the hallway pretending not to stare. News travels in offices like electricity, silent, invisible, unstoppable. The CEO finally spoke, voice lower than I had ever heard it. What are the consequences? The reviewer closed her laptop. At minimum, a conditional hold on the $88 million expansion pending full governance remediation. At maximum, referral for formal compliance investigation. The word investigation did what no accusation could. It stripped hierarchy bare. The daughter-in-law inhaled, preparing to argue, to negotiate, to assert family authority. Instead, the CEO raised a hand. That won't be necessary. Another silence, this one decisive. We will initiate immediate internal review, he continued. Effective today, archival governance oversight will transfer to an independent compliance lead. His gaze moved, not to legal, not to finance, to me. The shift was subtle but irreversible. No applause followed, no dramatic confrontation. Just a recalibration of power so quiet, it almost felt invisible. The reviewer gathered her documents. We will reconvene in 48 hours. Please prepare documented remediation steps and updated oversight structure. When the room emptied, the daughter-in-law remained seated. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The skyline beyond the window had darkened to steel. Reflections blurred, merging faces with city lights. You could have warned me, she said finally. I considered that. You didn't ask, I replied. It wasn't cruelty. It was fact. She studied me differently now, not as background, not as housekeeping, as variable. There would be no shouting, no public humiliation. Corporate corrections are rarely theatrical. They are administrative, precise, permanent. By evening, an internal memo circulated. Temporary governance realignment, pending regulatory clearance. Her name remained on the leadership page of the website, but her authority had narrowed, mine had expanded. The building felt different that night, not triumphant, just recalibrated, like a structure that had survived a stress test and quietly reinforced its beams. In my office, I returned the notarized charter to the safe. Paper, after all, does not seek revenge. It simply waits to be read correctly. And in 48 hours, the regulators would return, not to ask who held the original, but to see who now understood its weight. 48 hours later, the building breathed differently. Not lighter, not heavier, just aware. The second regulatory review session began without ceremony. No curated trays of mineral water, no polished speeches about modernization. The executive floor felt stripped of performance, as if someone had drawn back velvet curtains to reveal the raw mechanics behind them. This time, the compliance structure slide appeared first. My name sat beneath a newly created title, Interim Governance Oversight Lead. Temporary, the memo had said. But temporary roles have a way of becoming permanent when competence is documented. The lead reviewer arrived with the same measured composure. Her team settled in, laptops open, attention sharpened. Across the table, the CEO looked steadier than before, less defensive, more deliberate. The daughter-in-law was present, but quiet, her voice no longer guiding the rhythm of the room. I began. No flourish. No retaliation disguised as righteousness. Over the past 48 hours, I said, we conducted a full archival integrity audit. All foundational governance documents have been cataloged. secured and cross-referenced against certified digital counterparts. Access controls have been revised. Disposal protocols now require dual compliance authorization with recorded committee approval. A slide displayed updated process flow. The reviewer nodded once. And the attempted disposal. Classified as unauthorized preliminary action without committee approval, I answered evenly. Corrective measures have been implemented. No foundational originals were destroyed. The word unauthorized hung in the air, not accusatory, simply precise. The daughter-in-law's jaw tightened, but she did not interrupt. We moved methodically through remediation steps, oversight separation, audit trails, revised escalation thresholds. Each point supported by documentation, time-stamped and traceable. No assumptions, no improvisation. Halfway through, the reviewer asked the question that mattered most. Can you demonstrate institutional understanding of the governance clause that triggered this review? I slid the cream folder across the table. Not theatrically, not triumphantly. Carefully. She opened the notarized charter again, turning to the amendment page. I spoke not about its beauty or its history, but about its purpose. Why dual authorization exists. Why physical custody carries weight beyond digital duplication. Why governance is not decorative. The clause, I concluded, is not a technicality. It is a safeguard against unilateral discretion in moments of perceived urgency. The CEO exhaled slowly. The reviewer studied us for a long second. Then she closed the folder. Regulatory confidence, she said, depends less on perfection and more on response. You have demonstrated corrective capacity. The room did not erupt. There was no visible relief, no smiles exchanged. But the tension shifted. The conditional hold on the $88 million expansion, she continued, will be lifted pending final documentation submission within 10 business days. The number returned to the screen, no longer suspended like a threat, but grounded, conditional, yet attainable. $88 million, secured not by argument, by process. After the regulators left, the executive floor remained unusually quiet. Staff watched through glass partitions as leadership dispersed without conversation. Something fundamental had changed, not in title alone, but in gravity. The CEO approached my desk near sunset. I underestimated the value of restraint, he said plainly. There was no apology in the traditional sense, but there was recognition. Governance isn't loud, I replied. It doesn't need to be. He nodded. By the end of the week, the internal restructuring became permanent. My interim designation quietly disappeared. A formal announcement framed the shift as strategic reinforcement. The daughter-in-law retained her executive role, but without unilateral authority over documentation or compliance pathways. No public reprimand, no spectacle, just structural adjustment. In corporate ecosystems, that is the closest thing to consequence. On Friday evening, I stayed late reviewing the final submission packet. The office lights cast long reflections across polished floors. Somewhere down the hallway, a shredder hummed briefly, routine disposal, logged and approved. This time, nothing essential fed its teeth. I locked the safe one last time before heading out. The notarized charter rested inside, intact, its embossed seal catching a final glint of light. Outside, the city moved in its usual rhythm, cars threading through intersections, windows glowing in stacked constellations. The building behind me stood as it always had. But foundations once tested do not forget the pressure, and neither do the people who hold them. The first board meeting after clearance felt almost ordinary. Almost. The $88 million expansion had moved from conditional to approved with a quiet email from the regulators that morning. No fireworks, no congratulatory banners in the lobby. Just a formal notice confirming that governance remediation had met every requirement. Ordinary language, extraordinary weight. In the conference room, sunlight spilled across the long walnut table, illuminating faint scratches from years of negotiations and near misses. The skyline outside looked brighter than it had in weeks. Winter haze finally lifted. The CEO opened the meeting without theatrics. "Before we discuss expansion timelines," he said, "we'll begin with governance." That had never happened before. Slides appeared, this time not projecting ambition, but structure. Oversight charts, escalation pathways, archival custody protocols. My team's names listed clearly under defined responsibilities. No blurred authority. No decorative titles. Across the table, the daughter-in-law sat poised, attentive, composed in a way that felt less performative and more measured. Power had not vanished from her. It had simply been redistributed into boundaries. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't recount the crisis. I outlined the system. "Foundational documents," I said, "will undergo quarterly physical verification alongside digital audit reconciliation. Disposal of any governance-related material requires dual authorization and compliance committee notation. All archival access is logged, cross-monitored, and retained for 5 years." No one shifted impatiently. No one checked their phone. Because everyone in that room now understood something they hadn't before. Infrastructure is invisible until it isn't. Midway through the session, a board member asked lightly, "Out of curiosity, where is the original notarized charter kept?" A faint ripple of restrained amusement passed through the legal. "In secure custody," I replied. "Documented and verified." The CEO nodded once, satisfied. The question no longer carried suspicion. It carried assurance. After the meeting adjourned, people lingered in smaller conversations. Expansion timelines resumed. Investor briefings were scheduled. The machine of growth restarted, but with different calibration. In the hallway, the daughter-in-law approached me. For a moment, we stood facing the glass wall overlooking the city. "I thought modernization meant removing friction," she said quietly. "It does," I answered, "but only the right kind." She gave a small nod, not concession, not defeat, recognition. There would be no dramatic reconciliation, no transformation into friendship. Corporate relationships rarely rewrite themselves so neatly. But there was equilibrium. Weeks later, when the first tranche of expansion funds cleared, the company celebrated with a restrained reception in the lobby. No champagne towers, no speeches about visionary disruption. Just steady acknowledgement of milestone achieved. Employees moved through the space with subtle pride. Compliance staff laughed more easily. Legal no longer carried the quiet tension of near violation. Even finance seemed lighter. The building had not changed, the culture had. Late that evening, after most had gone home, I returned to my office one final time before leaving for the weekend. I opened the safe, not out of necessity, but habit. The cream folder rested where it always had. I lifted it briefly, feeling the texture of embossed seal beneath my fingertips. Paper, fragile in appearance, stronger than ambition when protected by process. They had mistaken silence for weakness. They had mistaken housekeeping for governance. They had mistaken legacy for clutter. What they learned, what all of us learned, was simpler and far more enduring. Foundations do not shout, they endure. I closed the safe gently, turned off the lights, and stepped into the corridor where the glass walls reflected only the city beyond, steady, luminous, unshaken,